Time pressure. It does weird things to you. Sometimes it makes you freeze. Sometimes it pushes you to move faster than you probably should. But every now and then it forces you to focus in a way nothing else really does. I've been wanting to build a piece just for my girlfriend for a while now. Not just something useful, but something personal. Something with meaning behind it. This table was meant to be that gift. A makeup table, made in a style you can't really find in the store anymore. It's delicate, traditional, full of curves and details. The kind of thing that takes time and care. I gave myself 2 weeks to build it before we left for the holidays, which, yeah, was ambitious. Especially since I hadn't done a build like this in a long time. Before moving to the UK, I used to make complex furniture all the time. It was my job, but over the last couple years I hadn't done much woodworking at all. So part of this was also about proving to myself that I could still do it, that I hadn't lost it. And maybe if I pulled it off, I'd feel ready to start taking commissions. The legs are still quite a bit oversized, so instead of turning all this wood into shavings and sawdust, I'm cutting a strip off with the table saw. I could have used my bandsaw for this to conserve even more material, but my resawing blade hadn't arrived yet. This is all still early in the process. Day 1 in the shop. I felt pretty confident. The steps were straightforward and everything was going smoothly. I had a clear plan in my head and I was hitting the marks I needed to hit. I knew the timeline was going to be tight, but at this stage it still felt manageable. I should probably explain why these legs need to start out so thick. Since they're Queen Anna style legs, they start out thick, but at the end become beautiful, curved and elegant. Using a template helps me make sure each leg is consistent and symmetrical. We'll get back to the legs later, but for now I need to work on the stretchers. One of the coolest parts of building your own furniture is getting to add small details that you just wouldn't see in something mass-produced. Like this, continuous grain across all 4 stretchers. It's one of those things most people won't notice right away, but it adds a subtle sense of flow and consistency that makes a piece feel more refined. To get that effect, I'm cutting all the stretchers from a single board, then marking them with a triangle, so the grain wraps around the piece in the same direction it did in the tree. If you mix up the order or flip one piece, it breaks the whole pattern, so you really have to stay organized as you go. Now, I was on a tight deadline with this build, but details like this were still important to me. It's easy to think you should skip the extras when you're short on time, but for me, these small things are the project. They are what turn it from just a table into something I made. It doesn't make the piece function better, but it gives it a kind of quiet richness. And even if nobody else notices right away, I know it's there, and I get to point it out to them. Over time, details like this become part of the story of the piece. You live with it, and it just feels right. Like the whole thing was built with intention, not just assembled. And sure, it's slower, especially when you're racing the calendar. But even under time pressure, I think it's worth it. Because once the piece is done, the deadline disappears, but the details stay. You saw me cut the stretchers in half earlier, and that's because in the theme of this whole table, we can't just have too many straight lines. So the 2 parts of the stretchers are going to come together at an angle. Because I cut one side at 90 degrees and the other at 62 degrees, the edges aren't the same width, and I need them to be to make the glue up possible later. So I'm taping the stretchers together and then taking a hand plane to them until they are the same size. You've probably never heard the name of this profile, Classical Roman OG, but I'm sure you've seen it before. It's one of those shapes that instantly make a piece feel a little older, a little more ornate. It fits the traditional style of the table perfectly. I need to route this profile into the stretcher before gluing it back together, because I won't be able to do it after. In the same spirit, I need to cut the shape into the bottom part of the stretchers now, as it would be way harder later. So technically, I said I only had 2 weeks to build this table. And that is true, kind of. What I didn't mention is that I may have started thinking about it a bit earlier. Just enough to do a rough sketch and make the main templates for the legs and stretchers. Problem was, I didn't have the wood yet, and also I was sort of a little busy rebuilding my house. See, our house used to be split into 2 separate dwellings. So one of the first things we had to do was tear out the dividing wall, which left the kitchen completely open to the upstairs. No door, just one big construction zone. So in the weeks before I officially started the table, we were full-time renovating. We were framing walls, plasterboarding everything, and then brought in plasterers to finish it properly. While they were doing that, I was actually filming a different project for my YouTube channel. A side table made to look like old beams with a massive dovetail connecting them, which you should check out. Right after finishing this video, of course. Anyways, by the time all that was done, it was very nearly Christmas, and the entire kitchen was covered in a fine layer of construction dust, which doesn't mix super well with, say, cooking for an entire family. And because our kitchen is basically just IKEA Kallax units, which, if you're not deep enough into IKEA furniture and don't know the name of their products, it's the square shelves, no doors, the dust got everywhere. So yeah, we deep cleaned the entire thing just in time for the family to arrive. Now that the stretchers are done, we can continue with the legs. And while I would love nothing more than to cut the curves into them right now, it's much easier to route the joinery while the legs still have 4 solid sides to reference from. For those lucky enough to own a Festool domino, this step would take maybe 10-20 minutes. And for the 2 people watching this who've never heard of one, let me give you a quick explanation of what it does. It's basically a glorified biscuit jointer that plunges perfect mortises for loose tenons. It's very expensive, costing over £1,000, and also one of the most controversial tools in woodworking. Some people say it's cheating, but honestly, so is having a jointer. I mean, we don't call it cheating just because it makes your boards flat faster, right? This is the same thing, it just saves time. Time I absolutely could have used, because instead of a domino, I had to make a routing template, which works fine, but took over an hour to design and build. And then came actually using it, which took me over 4 straight hours of routing with a cheap, slightly dull bit that screamed like a banshee and filled the shop with smoke. I don't have air filtration, and I couldn't open the garage doors without annoying my neighbors. I'd have to stop every few minutes, open all the doors, air it out, and then continue. It was loud, it was smoky, and it was deeply unpleasant. But hey, at least I didn't cheat. Now, for the most exciting part of this entire build, cutting the leg on the bandsaw. I mentioned earlier that my resaw blade hadn't arrived yet, but Axminster did send my curved cut blade just in time. Let me tell you, this thing cut like butter. I made a test leg out of soft pine using the blade that came with the bandsaw. And it was hard work, so I knew I had to upgrade before trying to cut through oak. Now comes the interesting part and how we create the shape of a Queen Anna style leg. We take our offcuts and tape them back on. Then we rotate the leg by 90 degrees and cut the side out as well. This doesn't just work on legs, by the way, but all kinds of shapes. I keep seeing videos of this technique on my Instagram feed, but the people are using it to make little wooden deer or little space shuttles. So if you too have seen these videos, now you know where this technique originated from. At this point, Christmas was getting uncomfortably close. I'd made good progress, hadn't run into any major problems, and somehow miraculously, everything had gone more or less to plan. But I was starting to feel the weight of the time I didn't have. Queen Anna legs are beautiful, but they're also a ridiculous amount of work. Curves in every direction, no straight lines to reference, and worst of all, the sanding. So much sanding. Shaping each leg is one thing, but they all have to be the exact same. The templates help to make the base, but from there, it's all up to you. I'd spent hours in the shop after dinner, just trying to get one more curve dialed in, one more transition blended. My hands were cramping, my back hurt, and the cold in the garage wasn't helping either. The irony was that technically, I still hadn't made any actual mistakes. No cuts I had to redo, no joinery blowouts, no pieces ruined. And yet, every evening I left the shop feeling like I was behind. I knew the hardest part was the legs, and with that out the way, I might finally be able to relax a bit. But then I remembered that I still had to make the drawers, and I knew I wanted them to be dovetailed, because a table like this can't just have butt joint drawers. And if you know anything about hand-cut dovetails, you know they take concentration, precision, and most of all, time. That's the thing about time pressure. Even when everything is going right, it still finds a way to stress you out. It doesn't matter that you're proud of the work so far, or that you've avoided any slip-ups. All you can think about is the clock, and whether the next step might be the one that finally takes longer than you can afford. But at the same time, I really didn't want to rush this part. The legs are the most defining element of the entire table. If they didn't look right, if they felt clunky or uneven, the whole thing would visually fall apart. So I kept going, long nights, short breaks, sanding until my fingers hurt, trying to move fast without actually rushing, hoping it would all be worth it in the end. And then finally, I was ready to move on. Before I could glue up the legs with the stretchers, I had to tape off the profile I'd cut earlier. Otherwise, it'd be impossible to clean it up later. Glue-ups are always the most stressful part of a build. You can spend days making everything perfect and still ruin it all in 5 minutes. No matter how much prep you do, it never feels like enough. The second the glue touches wood, the clock starts ticking. And suddenly, your calm little workshop turns into a high-stakes game show. Parts don't want to line up, clamps get stuck, glue ends up where it shouldn't. And the whole time, there's that little voice in your head whispering, if this goes sideways, you are starting over. But not this time. Everything went smooth. I had done enough prep. And as the final clamp went on, just relief. For the first time in the project, a major piece was done.
While editing, I noticed I lost a bunch of footage, so I'm back in the workshop to show you what you missed out on. So the last thing you saw me do was glue these two legs together. What you sadly missed out on was taking these two pairs of legs and gluing them together. Ignore these parts, that comes later in the video. I just didn't notice I lost the footage until after I had already done all the stuff. Because I didn't have any clamps that were actually long enough to glue this whole thing together, I had to use ratchet straps. So I just tied it around and then ratchet them to get tight. Sadly, another detail you missed was tidying up this joint. I just went over it with some sandpaper and it became really nice.
So yeah, this won't be the last time you'll see me talking to the camera about some lost footage, but more about that in a bit. At this point, the realization kicked in that I wasn't going to make it. The deadline I'd set for myself was impossible to reach now, and might have never been possible in the first place. I'd been so focused on pushing forward, on keeping momentum, that I never stopped to ask if the plan was even realistic in the first place. The scope was too ambitious. Sure, I had watched a video or two of people making these kinds of tables, but this was the first time of me trying this, and I just underestimated how long this would take. Too many curves, too many details that couldn't be rushed. And when you start cutting corners, things fall apart. Literally. It's a tough pill to swallow, especially when this is for someone you care about so deeply. But I had to take a step back and admit, I wasn't going to finish in time. And that was okay. Deadlines can be useful, but they can also blind you. They can make you feel like failure is missing the date, when the real failure would be compromising the work just to hit it. So I made a choice to let go of the timeline and just enjoy a nice Christmas with my family, with or without the table. And with that, Christmas came, and it was great. We had a good time and good food. And look there, under the red blanket, that thing looking like a barbecue, that's the table. And even though it wasn't finished, it didn't matter. She loved it all the same, and she knew I would finish it eventually. I took a bit of a break and focused on a couple different projects. But when I finally returned to the shop, it was a good feeling. No more time pressure pushing me every day. And I had something new pushing me. My original goal. Proving to myself that I can do this.
The next big part you missed was me making this tabletop. Last thing you saw on this was me gluing the panel together. The part you missed was me having to use the hand plane because this whiteboard doesn't fit through my planer. So I had to smooth it out using the hand plane and then sanding it to 150 grit. For this round over, I made myself a little template and then run a straight bit along here. And for this profile, we use two separate bits. So this one, like this. And then we have the bottom one going like this.
I have to be honest with you, I don't plan my furniture. Or that's not really true, but I don't put as much effort into planning as I probably should. But after years and years of woodworking, you start taking shortcuts. And the first place you start cutting corners are your plans. And then as you're building, you know there's a problem area and you tell yourself, oh well, I'll deal with it later. Well, later has come and I have to deal with how to attach the drawer slides. What you're seeing me make is my solution. I'm making this piece to fit in between the two stretchers, and because it mostly won't be visible, I can cut another corner. Before I started watching YouTube woodworking videos, I didn't even know pocket holes were a thing. And when I first saw them I thought, that's stupid, that's not real woodworking. But I gotta admit, they're great for cutting corners. But since I think they're stupid, I also never bought a pocket hole jig. But I got a drill, and that's good enough for me. Luckily, I saved the offcuts from the legs I cut earlier, and they're the perfect size for the drawer boxes. So, as long as I don't mess anything up, I've got exactly what I need. Ah crap, I cut these pieces too short. I was gonna connect them with dovetails, but now they're just exact length. Still have enough material for 1.5 drawers, but I'll need to do something I didn't want to do and cut into this board. It's kinda funny actually. The whole time I was under pressure, I didn't make a single real mistake. And now that the deadline's gone and I can finally slow down a bit, I cut my first piece too short. It's minor, sure, but still classic. Thankfully, I had bought a bit of extra wood, just in case something like this happened. Originally, I was going to use it for a matching stool to go with the table, but that'll have to wait for another video. For now, it's going towards the drawer boxes. Not what I intended, but at least I've still got what I need to finish this build. Dovetails and I go way back. They were a big part of my woodworking education. We were cutting them constantly. They showed up in nearly every practical exam. It didn't matter if you liked them or not. You were going to get real familiar with them. Even my final exam piece had hand-cut dovetails. Not the main feature, just part of the drawer construction. But they were still a big part of the grade. At the time, it felt like dovetails were the pinnacle. The joint that proved you were good, that you knew what you were doing. And then I started working as a furniture maker. And I never cut dovetails again. Not a single one. It was all cabinetry, built-ins, kitchens. Projects where speed mattered. We used lamellos, dowels, and screws, whatever got the job done efficiently and reliably, which honestly made sense for the kind of work we were doing. But it wasn't until I had been in that world for a while that it clicked. The point back in school wasn't the dovetail itself. It was about control, about learning how to saw to a line, chisel to a shoulder, work with precision and patience. Dovetails just happened to be the perfect test for that. Now that I'm going back to building for myself again, I actually get to revisit that skill. And yeah, dovetails can be tedious. They take a lot of concentration and they're not forgiving if you're tired or rushing. But it's kind of nice, being back in that headspace. It feels deliberate. It slows you down in a good way. It's one of those things I never thought I'd miss until I got to choose to do them again. And since I'm already trying to do this build justice, dovetails for the drawers just felt right. Just like with the leg glue up earlier, I'm making my life much easier by taping the inside corners of the drawers. This way I won't have to clean up any glue on the inside corners later. When making drawer boxes, you want to make sure everything is perfectly square. There's a very easy way of checking. You take the measurement from the inside corner, and if both are the same length, your box is square. If not, you can take a clamp over the diagonal and tighten it until they are the same length. A while back I got one of the weirdest comments I've ever seen. And I don't mean rude or mean, I mean weird. You know how people sometimes repost strange comments they get, and you think, no way someone actually said that. Yeah, I always kind of wanted one of those. Well, now I have one. It was on a totally normal video where I said something like, I'm making this box for my partner. Harmless, right? But apparently that was not okay to one particular viewer, because they responded with this full-on unhinged rant about how calling someone your partner is Orwellian, dehumanizing, anti-romance. At one point they even asked if I was implying that she was a prostitute. Like, what? How did we get here? Anyways, it was so off the rails I couldn't help but laugh. And so did she when I showed it to her. It made me think about how strange the internet can be sometimes. You can't take every comment to heart, because some of them aren't even about you. They're just people yelling into the void, hoping someone notices. But on the flip side, there are also a lot of good people out there. For every comment like that, there are 10 more from people who are kind, supportive, funny, or just genuinely excited about the work. And I just want to say, those do mean a lot to me. I don't always get the chance to respond to everyone, but I see them. And when you're deep in the middle of a difficult project and you don't know if you're good enough, those comments really make a difference. And hey, since apparently I'm no longer allowed to say my partner, I guess I should clarify, she's not my partner anymore. She's my fiancée. I proposed recently and thankfully she said yes. I tried a few combinations for the finish. The first one is 2 layers Fiddy's hard wax oil in white, but that left lots of white streaks in the deep grooves that oak has. On the other hand, if I only use clear hard wax oil, the oak becomes a little yellow. So the perfect solution is 1 layer of white and then 1 layer of clear. I also have some oil left over from my floor, but it leaves a bit of yellow residue in the grooves, so I'm using the Fiddy's. Normally when you film applying oil, it has this great reveal effect, but with this white oil it almost looks like I'm not applying anything, but I guess that was the goal. As I was applying finish to the table, I started reflecting on the whole project and what it took to get here. I started under pressure, trying to prove to myself that I still had the skills, that I could work fast and clean, and maybe even be ready to take on clients again. But somewhere along the way, the goal changed. It stopped being about speed and started being about care. About doing the work the way I wanted to do it. Not the fastest, not the most efficient, but the most intentional. Because when I step back and look at this table now, what I see isn't just a piece of furniture. I see long nights in the shop. I see the drawer side that I had to remake. I see that one curve I resanded 3 separate times because it still didn't feel quite right. And yeah, I see the deadline I missed. But I also see the reasons why it was worth missing. I've proven to myself that I can still do this, that I still love doing this. But also, if I ever want to do this professionally again, I've got some things I still need to get better at. Time management, estimating how long things actually take, building a workflow that doesn't just work under pressure, but works reliably over and over. This table reminded me of the kind of work I want to be known for. Not just clean joints or nice grain, but work with real attention behind it. Work with purpose. And if that's something you care about too, whether you're a woodworker, a designer, or just someone who appreciates things that are made well, I'd love to have you stick around and subscribe. Share the video, leave a comment. It really helps. I've got more projects coming soon, and I'd love for you to be part of that. And with that said, the table is finished. And it's by far one of the most beautiful pieces I've ever made.